All right, crash course in media and truth. We're doing it. Everything you need to know. Point 1. If they're talking like this, turn it off immediately. It will not inform you. In fact, it will do the opposite. It's infotainment. These people have a huge stake in outraging you, in wrapping you up in this disgusting attention economy that we're part of. Turn it off. The best thing I ever did for myself when I was younger was understand BC, AD, if something happened in the 11th century. A lot of people don't understand that, or even if they do understand what like 200 BC means on a human timeline, they don't really visualize it. At least I didn't. So get a piece of paper and start making hash marks. When do they think Homo sapiens were first here? When did the Roman Empire begin to collapse? When did Iraq and Iran go to war? And so if you learn, what BC, AD, this century, if you learn what that is as you're making this timeline and you just pick events that you think are good markers, you get a good feel on how the world works. But you can even just keep it in your wallet. And so if someone's talking about Ukraine in the 16th century, you can be like, what was the world like back then? What's coming? What were people like back then? What preceded this? But listening to some guy, Biden is stopping imports of Russian oil. It's just going to raise your blood pressure. It is not informing you. Turn that garbage off. There's this false dichotomy that people have where they say you can't be informed and be at inner peace. If you want to be informed, you have to constantly be sucked in and no, just turn off the garbage media and inform yourself. And, Wikipedia is great for that. You don't have to have a grand timeline. You can just have a little mini timeline. You want to learn about Ukraine? Okay, first hash mark. When were they first sovereign? And just keep reading. Okay, so they were a founding member of the Soviet Union. And just make another hash mark. And Wikipedia allows you to have fractal knowledge. And you can click Soviet Union, workers movements, solidarity in Poland. What's Poland's relationship to Ukraine? And that's how you build knowledge. Don't listen to these talking head assholes. They're horrible. Next point. Journalism is a lot like science. Science is the methodical approach to the acquisition of knowledge. The methodical approach to the acquisition of knowledge, wherein people are endlessly making and testing hypotheses, endlessly chasing down claims that people make, regardless of if they are inconvenient, regardless of if they do not fit a narrative. I cannot tell you how much coverage of Putin I have seen, and I'm quoting, one greedy man's conquest to blah, 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 a psychophant, an unhinged maniac. And they're doing people a disservice. Putin is a tactician. I don't like him. I want Ukraine to be sovereign, but you do not have some kind of moral license to misrepresent or hone a narrative because you don't like somebody. That's disgusting. It is not the job of science, social science, journalism, any of those entities that are truth-seeking endeavors to try to craft a narrative because they're afraid, they're fearful that people can't form their own opinions. If you're about as old as me, you'll remember it was once considered incredibly distasteful to cover jihadists in a way that was anything other than this very moralized condemnation. And we seem to have learned our lesson from that. There's a really great podcast called Caliphate. There's really great exploratory pieces. What did Khalid Sheikh Mohammed really believe? What was his origin? What did Osama bin Laden believe? And it's important to know that, to know Middle Eastern politics, to know the origin of Osama bin Laden. If you're trying to fight terrorism, wherever you are on the political spectrum, the world today is shaped by those beliefs very deeply. It's important to know that. And they're just doing everybody a disservice trying to spoon feed them a narrative. David Blight, Yale professor, I can't remember who he's quoting, but he says, history is a series of revolutions and counter-revolutions. A lot of people who are just trapped in this rah-rah, Putin bad, flag-waving, nationalistic, very West-centered narrative that's being spoon-fed to them by the media aren't going to understand how we got here. They're not going to understand what happens next. They're not going to understand things like how Trump's impeachment or the Soviet Union are tied into this issue. And, everybody loses. Next point. Misinformation is increasingly becoming a nonsense term. I saw firsthand during the Obama years when Ebola was sweeping through Africa. There were a lot of Facebook posts like how to cure Ebola, home remedies for fixing Ebola. Facebook was horrible at getting those off its platform. They're not good with genuine misinformation or disinformation. And, it's real misinformation. It's going to get people exposed and killed. But today, what I see a lot of is whatever the culturally dominant force finds inconvenient is misinformation. Whoever's controlling the avenues of communication, sometimes right, mostly left, because the left culturally dominates these tools that we use, even though a lot of people who own or operate these tools pay lip service. Like, they'll have a rainbow flag while slashing workers' rights. We all know that story, but it's still a culturally left-dominated space. Misinformation is what is inconvenient for them. Like a doctor, a well-respected doctor like Marty Makary, having a nuanced, pro-vaccination, but a nuanced view of who gets scheduled when, or talking about myocarditis risks. Like, he was accused of peddling misinformation, as a lot of doctors have been, for just not having the same exact opinion as an entity like the CDC. That's not misinformation. It's not going to get anyone killed. People need to learn to disagree better. Alt media is my next point. So I'm bitching about the media. The media has been so irresponsible, and what has emerged out of that? Joe Rogan, Tim Pool, some guy with a microphone at an event. What I want to say is they have just as much of a financial and reputational stake to craft a narrative, if not more. What their value is they will sometimes expose or talk about the hidden narrative, which is important because there are disallowed narratives and there are hidden ones that people don't want to talk about. So like currently, it's mostly right-wing shitheads or alt media who are talking about what Putin's strategy is, what's driving him, and often that's in a favorable light. And so I don't think anyone needs to view Putin in a favorable light. I don't think he's a good guy. But there is value in taking a holistic, honest view of the motivations of the actors involved in this. So, just don't look at alt media as a holy grail. Take it in the same as you would as conventional media and try to find the truth in it. Which brings me to my next point. In times of crisis, and my life has just been one unending crisis after another, whether it's 9/11 and the launch of the war on terror, or economic collapse, or a global pandemic, or whatever it is, in these times of crisis, you have to have your defenses up, particularly because the media becomes a mouthpiece for authority. They will uncritically pass along anything the Pentagon, the White House, whoever says. And that brings me to a sort of sub-point, which is just that a lot of journalists are just kind of dumb. Like, they have a comms degree and they're exceptionally politically motivated. And so they're not really qualified to, challenge the CDC's stance on mass boosting, for example, and compare what the World Health Organization's recommendations are, or the efficacy of certain public health policies. All they can really do is be mouthpieces. But even ones who should know better become mouthpieces in times of crisis. So that's generally it. The last thing I would say is just always never take for granted that a deeply held belief of yours can be wrong. Always, when you're holding the artifact in your hand of this, in your mind, this opinion that you care so much about, it can melt in front of you, especially if you're young. The opinions that you deeply hold now can change in 3 months or a year. And you just always want to say, how can this thing I believe be wrong? What are the conditions that would lead this to be wrong? And it happens to everybody, even me. I pride myself on trying to find truth, on trying to, not get wrapped up in narratives, but emotion factors in. And it's important to not say, I'm going to become an emotionless robot. That's a lot of the track a lot of people take. No, you will remain emotional. If you're going to lie to yourself and try to stifle those emotions, you're just going to get led further astray. Know what your biases are, know what your beliefs are, be honest about them, understand that they might change. Thank you very much for listening. And if I left anything out, leave it in the comments. I really appreciate it. I got a new subscriber, and I appreciate those of you who watch. Thank you very much.